There's a version of the 1960s that people like to remember. Peace, love, psychedelics, freedom. But underneath all of that was something darker, something obsessive, violent, unstable. And right in the center of it all, a musician, a filmmaker. A story so tangled that today nobody can agree on what was real. This is the story of Kenneth Anger, Bobby Beausoleil, and how a film called Lucifer Rising might connect to the Manson family murders. And at the end of it all, a curse. Who was Bobby Beausoleil? Before the murders, before prison, Bobby Beausoleil was something else entirely. To begin the story with a cliche, his last name meant beautiful son. Born in 1947 to a working-class French Catholic family in California, Bobby's father supported them as a milkman, before working his way up the ladder to support his family. Despite Bobby's sunny name and angelic looks, his youth was full of petty antics and infractions, which eventually resulted in a year of reform school when he was 12. During this time, Bobby was already acting rebellious and was not showing any interest in the Bible at home with his family, and instead, he took interest in Paradise Lost, written by John Hamilton, published in 1667. And if you didn't know, or a little fun fact, Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan who connects in our story later, drew inspiration from the charismatic, rebellious anti-hero portrayal of Satan in Paradise Lost. And by the age of 16, Bobby ran away with his guitar to Los Angeles to chase his dreams of becoming an actor and musician, not looking back. He played in early versions of bands connected to Arthur Lee, even briefly in what would become the band Love. He even starred in the documentary Mondo Hollywood. The film follows the hippie and drug culture at the time, while also covering popular drug use and homosexuality. Eventually, he landed in Haight-Ashbury, right before the Summer of Love.
San Francisco trembled as a cultural earthquake shook the city. Thousands of young people from around the country were descending on the city's Haight-Ashbury district. Rebels determined to trash their parents' old values while embracing a new age consciousness of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Encouraged by a loose coalition of beatniks, poets, and writers, these early denizens of the Haight-Ashbury cosmos called for a summer of love in San Francisco. But somebody forgot to tell Police Chief Thomas Cahill.
We know from watching these people and seeing what their activities are, and particularly their activities as far as narcotics are concerned, marijuana, LSD, these are making no contribution to their own lives, to the lives of the community of San Francisco, nor to society as a whole. And certainly nobody should let their young children come into San Francisco unsupervised to become a part of a group such as that.
This is key because it wasn't just a music scene, it was a cultural explosion. Psychedelics, radical ideas, occult curiosity, total rejection of normal society, and that's exactly where Kenneth Anger finds him. At a psychedelic event called the Invisible Circus, Bobby's performing with belly dancers on a stage. Sweat falls down his face as he plays his heart out, and the crowd watching and admiring is Kenneth Anger. Kenneth Anger was an underground filmmaker whose films explore homosexuality, Satanism, pop culture, and occult mythology, having ties to Hollywood and Anton LaVey. During this time, he's looking to cast someone in his upcoming film, Lucifer Rising, which is inspired by Aleister Crowley's philosophy. What is that philosophy, you might ask? You can actually find a photo of Bobby standing next to it, or posing, and it is do what thou wilt. Kenneth Anger, believing he sees a prophet on stage, approaches Bobby and tells him, "You are Lucifer." Not a suggestion, a declaration. Anger then casts him as the leader in Lucifer Rising to act as Lucifer. What some people don't know is before Kenneth approached Bobby, he previously approached about 5 other men for this role, but ultimately ended up on Bobby. Bobby agrees, but he wants creative control too, so they make a deal. He'll star in the film, but also compose the soundtrack. While this is happening, Bobby's current band watches in the background. Seeing the shift and change in his interest in the occult, the band leaves Bobby. So he forms a new band, the Magic Powerhouse of Oz, and then they move in together. They set up in the Westerfeld House in San Francisco. This place becomes ground zero for everything. Occult symbolism everywhere, furniture marked with 666. Members of the house supposedly would engrave furniture with cult symbols or sigils. Think of this as one big content house in Los Angeles, but on drugs, or the Sigil Cult House times 100. If you're curious about what Sigil Cult is, go to my previous videos. But this is when Bobby and Kenneth begin to bump heads. The relationship starts to crack. Bobby begins asking Anger for money, for instruments, for production, but according to Anger, that money is going to drugs and women. At the same time, Bobby is living there rent-free, bringing girls in and out of the house constantly. And this is where it begins to get uncomfortable, because Kenneth appeared to have some sort of real emotional attachment to Bobby. Possibly romantic, possibly possessive. But Bobby doesn't return that energy. Bobby states in an interview the homoerotic symbolism in Anger's work didn't resonate with him. I have a theory, though, that young Bobby took advantage of Kenneth Anger and his admiration he had for Bobby. Long story short, Bobby had his head gassed up about being Lucifer. Now multiply that with the current LSD usage at the time, and the reported breakdowns and awakenings he had when high. I wouldn't say I'm taking too far of a stretch. So now you have one person emotionally invested and one person detached and benefiting. That tension builds fast. Then everything collapses. Shortly afterwards, they had a performance together that was fueled by drugs and LSD. Witnesses say that things got out of control. Kenneth apparently had a live breakdown. And the next day, Bobby leaves. But as he flees, Kenneth in anger starts working on a curse to place on him. Bobby steals Kenneth's van, takes film footage, and drives to Los Angeles. After driving not too long, he breaks down outside Spawn Ranch. He looks over and begins seeing a crowd of females coming over the hill barefooted, lightly jogging, almost skipping. This is where he meets Charles Manson. The first murder, Gary Hinman. Gary Hinman was a multifaceted individual in the 1960s, known for his involvement in various counterculture activities. He was a PhD candidate in sociology at UCLA, a political activist, a Zen Buddhist, a musician, a piano teacher, and a drug dealer who operated out of his basement. Bobby had purchased drugs from Hinman during the summer of 1969. He sold them to another person, who then complained about their quality, causing Beausoleil to need his money back. July 1969. Bobby drove over to Hinman's to make it right with two girls that knew Gary very well, Susan Atkins and Mary Brunner. But Hinman didn't have the money. After Bobby roughed Gary up a bit, they called Charles Manson, who decided to come to the house with a samurai sword. When he arrived, Manson took the sword and cut across Hinman's face and ear. Bobby looks over at Charles and asks why he had cut Hinman. He said, "To show you how to be a man." His exact words, Bobby said. I will never forget that. According to Bobby, who at one time was given the nickname Cupid for his good looks, tried to patch the wound up and make things right. Gary Hinman, however, insisted on receiving medical attention and threatened to talk to the police. I knew if I took him, I'd end up going to prison. Gary would tell on me, for sure, and he would tell on Charlie and everyone else, Bobby said in an interview. It was at that point I realized I had no way out. Bobby then takes Gary's life, not only in a failed attempt to protect his life, but Charlie's as well. Hinman was connected to the same scene, music, drugs, money. At the crime scene, political piggy, written in blood, Black Panther symbols. This was staged, designed to mislead police. Bobby is arrested then days later, and now everything escalates. Days after Bobby's arrest, the Manson family commits the Tate LaBianca murders. Victims include Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant. The official explanation pushed by Vincent Bugliosi, Manson wanted to start a race war, inspired by Helter Skelter, but not everyone believes that. Enter Truman Capote, one of the most influential true crime writers ever. After interviewing Bobby, he says Bobby is the key to the entire case. His theory, the Tate LaBianca murders were copycats, done to confuse police and make it seem like Hinman's killer was still free, reduce pressure on Bobby, meaning those murders might have happened because of him. But here's the problem, nobody in the story is fully reliable. Capote was known to stretch truth, and Bobby changed his story repeatedly. Manson contradicted himself constantly. At one point, Bobby says it had nothing to do with me. At another, Manson was influenced by me, which I think is him at that point clout chasing, seeing all the headlines more about Charles than Bobby himself. So what's real? No one knows. Journalist Tom O'Neill spends 20 years investigating. Instead of answers, he finds more questions. A conspiracy currently exists that Anton LaVey, Aleister Crowley, and more occultists that inspired murderers were a part of a secret operative called M.K. Often. Authorities watching Manson before the murders claims he may have been an informant. Even Hollywood connections, victims tied to underground drug networks and social circles, claim Manson allegedly was seen around before, spotted at parties, hanging out. He was an ordinary guy. This wasn't just chaos, it was a web. Still, it's all just a theory and for you to decide. While all of this is happening, Kenneth Anger keeps working on Lucifer Rising. He brings in Led Zeppelin's guitarist Jimmy Page to work on the soundtrack. Page was given the job of scoring the film but delivered only 20 minutes of music instead of the required 40 minutes, leading to a major fallout, personal disputes, and Anger placing a curse on Page. The curse he placed on Page is allegedly named the Curse of King Midas. He publicly bragged the curse caused the band's misfortunes, accidents, tragedies, and drug addiction struggles. That falls apart. Then Bobby, from prison, reaches out and somehow he convinces them to let him finish the soundtrack. Inside San Quentin prison, he builds instruments, records music, organizes inmates into a band. He literally was taking parts from the bunk beds, available workshops, and making instruments to record music and albums. He received help from cellmates and formed a band called the Freedom Orchestra. Anger calls it the All-Killer Orchestra, a film about Lucifer, scored by murderers. The final act, The Curse. After everything, Kenneth Anger wears a necklace, a frog, with the inscription, Bobby Beausoleil turned into a frog by Kenneth Anger. That's not random. In occult symbolism, frogs represent transformation, degradation, being reduced spiritually. Anger believed in ritual magic, and intention, and symbolic power, and when Bobby left, rejected him, broke that connection, Anger didn't just walk away, he cursed him, or at least, he believed he did. So, look at the pattern. A young man full of potential, chosen to embody Lucifer, pulled into an intense obsessive relationship, a chaotic falling out, a symbolic curse, and then a descent into a cult, a real murder, a connection to one of the most infamous crimes ever. Coincidence? Maybe. Everything started the moment Kenneth Anger looked at Bobby Beausoleil and said, "You are Lucifer." And maybe, in his eyes, he never stopped being one.